that's trying to find his way into some sensationalist.
These big systems where everything's all about flash.
Exactly.
But that's not how your parents, saw the world, right? When you said that all they cared about was you being honest and
yes, exactly,
and doing your best in some enterprise.
In whatever,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because we're talking in Iowa. People always, I think, were surprised about me connecting with folks in small town Iowa. And the reason I did was, first of all, I had the benefit that at the time nobody expected me to win. And so I wasn't viewed through this prism of Fox News and conservative media and making me scary. At the time, I didn't seem scary other than just having a funny name. I seemed young. Sometimes I look at my pictures from then and I said, I can't believe anybody voted for me because I look like I'm 25. But I'd go into these towns and, everybody felt really familiar to me because they reminded me of my grandparents and my mom and that attitude that you talk about, you saw all through the state. And I saw this when I was traveling through Southern Illinois when I was first campaigning for the United States Senate. And I actually see it everywhere across the country. The issue to me, Marilyn, is not so much that those virtues that you prize and that you care about and that are vital to our democracy aren't there. They are there in little league games and
emergency rooms
and in school buildings, and people are treating each other the way you would want our democracy to cultivate. But there's this huge gap between how folks go about their daily lives and how we talk about our common life and our political life.
Exactly.
And people describe it as the difference between Washington and Main Street, but it's not just Washington. It's the way we talk about our politics, our foreign policy, our common endeavors. There's this gap, and the thing I've been struggling with throughout my political career is how do you close the gap? There's all this goodness and decency and common sense on the ground, and somehow it gets translated into rigid, dogmatic, often mean-spirited politics. And some of it has to do with all the filters that stand between ordinary people who are busy and running around trying to look after their kids, do a good job, do all the things that maintain a community. So they don't have the chance to follow the details of complicated policy debates. They know they want to take care of somebody who's sick, and they have a generous impulse. How that gets translated into the latest Medicare budgets aren't always clear. They know they want us to use our power wisely, and that violence often begets violence. But they also know the world's dangerous, and it's very hard to sort out, as you talk about in your essay, fear, when violence must be met, and when there are other tools at our disposal to try to create a more peaceful world. So that, I think, is the challenge. I'm very encouraged when I meet people in their environments. Somehow it gets distilled at the national political level in ways that aren't always as encouraging, right?
I think one of the things that is true is that many Americans on every side of every issue, they think that the worst thing you can say is the truest thing, you know?
No, tell me what you mean.
Well, for example, I mean, I'm a great admirer of American education, and I've traveled. I mean, a lot of my essays, you know, are lectures given in educational settings,
Right.
universities everywhere, and they're very impressive. They are very much loved by people who identify with them. You know, you meet faculty who they're very excited about what they're doing, students that are very excited, and so on. And then you know, you step away and you hear all this stuff about how the system is failing and we have to pull it limb from limb and all the rest of it, you know. And you think, have you walked through the door? Have you listened to what people say? Have you taught in a foreign university? You know, we have a great educational system that is. It's really a triumph of the civilization. I don't think there's anything comparable in history, you know? And it has no defenders. Most of the things we do have no defenders because people tend to feel the worst thing you can say is the truest thing you can say.
Well, but that's part of what makes America wonderful is we always have this nagging dissatisfaction that spurs us on. That's how we ended up going west. That's how I'm tired of all these people back east. If I go west, there's going to be my own land, and I'm not going to have to put up with this nonsense, and I'm going to start my own thing, and I got my homestead, and you know.
It's also true that the farther west you go, the more overwhelmingly beautiful the landscape is.
That's
I think people are very much pulled along by that.
That helps. It is true, though, that you know, that restlessness and that dissatisfaction, which has helped us go to the moon, and create the internet, and build a transcontinental railroad and build our land-grant colleges, that those things, born of dissatisfaction, we can very rapidly then take for granted and not tend to, and not defend, and not understand that, how precious these things are. You know, and this is where conceptions of government you know, can get us in trouble. Whenever I hear people saying that our problems would be solved without government, I always want to tell them, you know, you need to go to some other countries where there really is no government.
Yes.
You know, where the roads are never repaired, where nobody has facilitated electricity going everywhere, even where it's not economical, where
The postal system
doesn't work, or kids don't have access to basic primary education. That's the logical conclusion if, in fact, you think that government is the enemy. And that's, you know, that too is a running strain in our democracy. You know, that's sort of in our DNA. We're suspicious of government as a tool of oppression, and that skepticism is healthy, but it can also be paralyzing when we're trying to do big things together.
And also, you know, one of the things that doesn't take into account is that local governments can be great systems of oppression. And that it's a wonderful thing to have a national government that can intervene in the name of national values.
Yeah. Well, that was the lesson of the entire movement to abolish slavery and the civil rights movement.
Exactly.
And that's one thing, you know, I mean, I do think that one of one of the things we haven't talked about that does become the fault line around which the us and them formula rears its head is the fault line of race. And even on something like schools that you just discussed, I mean, part of the challenge is that the school systems we have are wonderful, except for a handful of schools that are predominantly minority that are terrible. You know, our systems for maintaining the peace in our criminal justice systems generally work, except for this huge swath of the population that is incarcerated at rates that are unprecedented in world history. And you know, when you are thinking about American democracy or Abrahamic Christianity in your writings, how much does that issue of the other come up? At least in Gilead, that factors into one major character trying to figure out how he can love somebody in the 50s that doesn't look like him.
Yeah. Well, you know, Iowa never had laws against interracial marriage. Mm-hmm. Only Iowa and Maine never had.
Those are the only two.
Yeah. And you know, Grant really did call it the shining star of radicalism and so on, you know. Never had segregated schools. They were illegal from before, while it was still a territory, right. And so on. And these laws never changed, and they became the basis for the marriage equality ruling that the Supreme Court here did. Mm-hmm. So that whole stream of the culture never changed. And at the same time, the felt experience of the culture is not aligned with the liberal tradition of the culture, right. You know? Right. And so in that book, you know, Jack has every right to think he can come to Iowa, you know, and yet what he finds, you know, makes him frightened even to raise the question.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to shift gears for a second. You told me that when you started writing, it just kind of showed up in some ways. I mean, when you started writing your novels, that it was just forced upon you, and that you didn't map it out and had a formula for what it was that you intended to write. Tell me about when you were writing Gilead and Home, and you know, some of my favorite books. How did you decide I'm going to start writing about some old pasture in the middle of cornfields?
Well, you know,
because by that time you had gone East Coast, you had traveled in France.
I know, and you know, the Middle West was still a very new thing for me. I got a voice in my head. It was the funniest thing, but you know, like, I mean, I've been reading history and theology and all these things for a long time. Right. And then I was in Massachusetts, actually, to spend Christmas with my sons. They were late coming to where we were going to meet. I was there with a pen and lined paper. And I started writing from this voice. The first sentence in that book is the first sentence that came to my mind. And I have no idea how that happens. I was surprised that I was writing